Now, with all of that vocabulary, you need to create those strong, deep connections that I was talking about, that mental imagery that is connected with the word. There should be no translation. You should try and get rid of translation as much as possible. So now for reading, you should just read. And so for you, if you're learning English, when you're reading English, the text should directly paint a picture for you mentally. So that's basically it. It's just because if you think about these flashcard systems and spaced repetition, reading what you love naturally is a spaced repetition system. Because what they do with spaced repetition system is that you've got your, the most common vocabulary in the language, and then you review it after a day and after 2 days and, after a week. But it's for me, it's kind of like it could be a very boring process of just going through a list of cards. But if you, for example, so you're a Japanese person, and if you're learning English and you want to learn about the French Revolution. Now search for articles about the French Revolution in English. Now today, when you read an article about the French Revolution, you will naturally find the most common vocabulary in that article, because naturally content has the most common vocabulary in the language. It has to be there. In all the newspapers you read and all the magazines, the most common words in the language should be there. And if they're not, then they're not the most common words in the language. So if you're reading an article about the French Revolution, you will see vocabulary repeat and repeat and repeat again. So every time it repeats, you should create that deep mental imagery with those words. Every time you see it in the article, you should try and do that. And then it reinforces and makes the connection stronger. So this is kind of like spaced repetition, within one article. After 2 or 4 or 5 or 6 minutes, you see these words again and again. So now if you're interested in the French Revolution, maybe 2 days later, you read another article about the French Revolution. Or maybe you read another article about history and it mentions the French Revolution. But the point is that if you naturally have an interest in a topic, and if you read it today, and if you read something about it again next week and again next month, that is natural spaced repetition, because you will see that vocabulary again and again and again. And as long as you allow those words to paint a picture for you, create those deep mental connections with the words, every time you do that, to me, that is basically a spaced repetition system, and it's a natural one. So the biggest thing for me is that developing fluency is basically time. You've got to spend time with the language. It's time consuming content, creating those deep connections, and just doing lots and lots and lots of that, because that's what you do in your first language. Actually, in your first language, that's what you do without thinking about it. You just read what's interesting for you. And, for most people in the first language, articles and stories naturally paint a picture for them mentally. So now, if you want to think about grammar, for people in their first language, most people for their first language actually don't learn grammar. And what I think is going on is that they follow a natural method of just reading, or listening, and focusing on meaning as well, because they want to understand the topic. And then I think subconsciously, or somewhere in the back of the brain is recognizing patterns in the language. It's something you don't have to think about really. You just have to focus on meaning. Over time, lots and lots and lots of time, there's some sort of tool, or your subconscious, I think it's doing all those calculations in the background when it comes to grammar and things like that. So it's kind of like, let your brain do all that work. Let your brain do all that analytical work in the background. And you just focus on the simple task of reading what is interesting for you, and focusing on meaning. Now, if you can only really read what is interesting for you if you're at a higher level. So if you're at the lower level, and if you're beginning, I think if you find graded readers, search for graded readers. It's basically stories or articles written at different levels. So that would be the best place to start. Or, go to a language school and study the course book, because the language used in that course book is adjusted to a lower level. And now you can build your vocabulary there. But at some point, you got to start living in the language and naturally study the topics that you're interested in. But if you're at that lower level, there's a website called Link. It's www.lingq.com. With this website, they've got first of all, they've got I think between 10 and 15 languages that you can learn. And then they've got levels for every language. So it starts from, I think, beginner 1, beginner 2, Intermediate 1, Intermediate 2, Advanced 1, Advanced 2. So choose your level. Then when you click on a lesson, you will get text, and then you'll get audio, and you can click on the word and you can get the definitions. That's a great place to start, because the stories will be easier, the language will be easier, and you can build your vocabulary there. But at some point, go to the real stuff. If you're studying English and if you want to be fluent in English, sit down and just relax with the National Geographic. Go to the National Geographic website in English and sit down and just read articles. Learn about nature and geography and things like that. Or if you love technology, there's an online magazine called Wired, wired.com, wired.com, and it's all about technology, but it's not very, very technical. It's kind of like a general kind of entertaining look at technology. Go there and just sit down for maybe hours and just read articles about technology and focus on the meaning. Forget translation. And that's basically it. So consume as much content as possible and just read.